My name is Portia Lauder, and I share videos about my experiences in prison, before, during, and after. I spent 5 years in federal prison for real estate fraud, and I get the question a lot, what is real estate fraud? So this is my attempt to explain what real estate fraud is, and if you're not interested, just keep scrolling. So, real estate fraud could be a misrepresentation on a loan app. When you fill out a loan application, if you say that you make more money than you do, that's a fraud. If you say that you're going to live in the home, but you don't move into it, that's a fraud. In my case, actually, I'm going to go back a little bit. So, real fast overview of my life that maybe will make a little bit more sense why I would get involved in such deals. My parents were both entrepreneurs, both real estate investors. I grew up in a small town in southern Utah. I was the oldest of 7 children, and my parents were hustlers. They worked full-time jobs and then had side businesses, and we were always buying and selling and moving with real estate. I was a young single mother. I had my first child when I was 17, and by the time I was 21, I was a single mother with 2 children, no child support, no father in the picture. When I was 23, I got pregnant again. I know, doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's what happened. And because I knew that I wasn't giving my children what they deserved, I chose to place my son for adoption. It was much more difficult than I thought. I knew it would be painful, but I didn't understand the deep feelings that I felt inside, and I ended up addicted to drugs. This is the short version. I came home late one night to my 2 children who my parents were taking care of, and my son was he had been crying for a long time waiting for me, and my heart broke that night, and I started down the path of recovery and got sober. And I thought that would be the hardest thing I'd ever have to do, and boy, was I wrong about that. I ended up meeting the man that I'm married to now. We've been married for 28 years. He's a great man, and he adopted my children. We started to build a new life, and I was grateful. I knew the difference because I had been in some dark places. I started my own photography company, and it grew really well, and then I did what I usually do, and I had 2 more children really close together, 18 months apart, and I ended up having to have a back surgery. When I had the back surgery, I relapsed on prescription drugs, and about that time, the real estate market was going crazy. And I thought, well, if I can just make some money in real estate, I won't have to work so hard as a photographer. At first, it was just buying lots and flipping them, but I was trying to learn from everyone else, and there were other people that were doing what's called equity deals, where they would buy a house, pull the cash out, invest that money in a different investment, and supposedly the market was going to continue to go up. And I remember the first time someone presented one of these deals, and I thought, why would you borrow more than the house is worth? Or if the appraisal's high and you have to pay a lot of money for the appraisal, is that legal? And I knew that I shouldn't do it, and I got involved anyway. Poor judgment. My integrity was weak. If I'm really being honest with myself, my addiction was a big part of that, and I had just been going down a really kind of a slippery slope in terms of my integrity. So the first deal that I did was like a $4 million house. Supposedly that's what the value was, but we could buy it for $2.5 million. Still a lot of money, crazy, right? I had a friend who was a hard money lender, which meant that he lent cash to people on investments, and we went in and looked at it, and we thought we could turn around and sell it and make a bunch of money. So we bought it, and then we couldn't get a loan on it, and we ended up doing one of these equity deals where we pulled the cash out and started investing it. And if I would have just done one of those deals, I probably wouldn't end up in prison because a lot of people did them, but I got involved in a lot of these deals. And really what happened is I was in over my head and I was upside down. And as the market continued to go, you could see that it was going to crash. It did, and I heard that I was under federal investigation. Terrifying, by the way. Awful. I mean, I made the choice, so you got to deal with the federal investigation, but that went on for years. And in 2011, I was indicted for mortgage fraud, real estate fraud. Anytime you send a wire across state lines and it to different banks, that's a fraud, and that's a federal charge, not a state charge. Well, I learned all these things, right, talking to attorneys. I fought it instead of just getting honest with myself and the feds and saying, hey, I made this mistake, how can I make it right? Eventually, after I was indicted and I, again, fought it, I was planning to go to trial in 2014. And 3 weeks before my trial, we were at the Salt Lake City Federal Courthouse, and a man was shot by the U.S. Marshals in the courtroom next to ours. The courthouse was locked down. I walked out, did an interview with the news, and the next day they revoked my pretrial release, put me in a county jail, took my clothes, totally traumatic, and I was left there for 10 days. Eventually transferred from prison to prison under the guise of a mental evaluation. And finally, 3 months later, I pled guilty in those conditions to get out of those conditions. And I was angry. The crazy thing about it is I was guilty. So how fortunate am I that I actually pled guilty? I had to reconcile all of that. And I had 5 years in prison to do it. So anyway, 6 months later, I walked into a federal courthouse. And at that point, to get sentenced, I could feel the seriousness of what I had done and see that not only had I hurt my children and my family and my community, I had seriously damaged myself through my lack of integrity. And the judge sentenced me to the maximum sentence, which was 7 years in federal prison. I've shared other videos about what that was like to have to leave my children. I had 5 children. My husband stayed with me, which is a miracle, great man. And he drove me to Dublin, California, and I walked into a federal prison, FCI, high security. And I spent a year at that prison, and I was still really mad. So I was blogging about how awful the prison was, and they ended up putting me in the SHU, which is segregation. And I was in an isolation cell again for 3 weeks and then transferred around and ended up at a different prison. The good news is I had 3 more years, and I really got humble. At a certain point, I recognized what I had done and how I'd hurt the people I loved, and met some amazing women in prison. And when I walked out of federal prison, I was a different person. I felt really good about myself, and my husband was waiting for me with flowers. And when I got home, I went to work in drug treatment, and I'm a recovery coach now. And I wrote 2 books, which is kind of cool. They're both available in prisons for free if you have anyone or know anyone that's in prison. The first one, Living Louder, is about my experiences in prison. And the second one, Born to be Brave, I wrote about my younger years and then other people that I've met since I got home from prison. So that's a little bit about me. And you can look me up. The books are available on Amazon or Audible, and I will continue to share shorter videos about my experiences in prison.